Beautiful good afternoon, everyone. I know we are a minute ahead of time. This is again to give Facebook time to synchronize with the online streaming. In the meantime, let's get to know to each other. I'm Sandra. I'm Austrian and I'm currently based in Lisbon, Portugal. What about you who have already joined? Where are you from? Where are you currently based? And with that, we can also test if the chats are working. If you're joining via Facebook online streaming, feel free to use the comment section to also let me know where you're from and where you're based. So we have Hungary, so Hungarian from Hungary, Warsaw, Poland, Romania living in the Czech Republic, Manuel from Venice, Italy, Warsaw, Poland, Katowice, Poland. The others, when I look at the last names, I assume there is a big Italian population here as well today. Okay, it's 2. I think Facebook streaming has caught up. Yes? Yes, Facebook streaming has caught up, so let's get started. Welcome to the third module about today. And I see there's something not working with the streaming. Then let's give the streaming again a chance to catch up. And I see Bologna, Italy has joined. So module 3, how to find and contact recruiters and companies and how to network. So we will have a really intensive module today. Please do take notes. The presentation will not be made available. It will be super interactive with exercises, and you can ask questions by using the chat here on Click Meeting or live in the comment section on Facebook. And I can see we're still having broadcast issues, but in the meantime, I'll just go ahead, okay? Good. As you can infer, IT support is sitting to my left. So after the webinar, for those who join for the first time, we have set up an open webinar participants group on LinkedIn and Facebook. Once you send a join request, Marcelina will verify that you have indeed been registered. And mentioning Marcelina, I want to mention her because she's behind the email address webinar@careerangels.eu. And in the last 7-8 weeks, she's sent over 1,000 emails, making sure that you get the recordings, the links, the materials, the homeworks, etc., etc. So big thank you at this point to Marcelina. Without her, this would not be possible, believe me. And I also have to say thank you to my colleague Anna, who runs the Polish edition. In the first edition, she's done over 8 hours of webinars, sharing her know-how. While saying thank you, I also want to say thank you to all of you who have decided to support those webinars by contributing to our crowdfunding efforts and via PayPal or transfers. Among others, thanks to that, we were able to actually launch the second edition. We also want to say thank you to Click Meeting, the platform we're currently using. I have to say, over the last 2.5 months, I have been using probably all of the online platforms available for webinars, either as a host or as a presenter. And I have to say, Click Meeting is the best, not because they have decided to give us access to the tool for free, because we support people affected by COVID, but because it's actually the best from an organizer's perspective. So Click Meeting, thanks a lot for supporting us. My name is Sandra Bichl, and I realized that yesterday was June 1st, which means that Career Angels has officially been on the market for 10 years. Before establishing Career Angels in June 2010, I myself worked in executive search and then for a while in marketing and sales. And by combining those two worlds, Career Angels has been able to support over 5,000 people, professionals across Europe when it comes to the career management and job search. What's most important for today's webinar, that ever since the beginning, and we actually started to do it precisely in 2002, we started collecting data when it comes to tracking the efficiency of different channels, which means that we have tracked and analyzed over 5,000, the reactions of over 5,000 headhunters and almost 20,000 decision makers. Which means that during the webinars, or also when you have career consultations with one of our career consultants, we do not share our personal professional opinion, but we share the reaction of approximately 25,000 people. And when I say reaction, it's really how they react to CVs and not what they declare is important to them. They're just on top of my head, one thing we discussed during the second module is what people verbally say is important to them on the CVs versus what they actually respond to. And the other one, which we'll see today, is the efficiency of the job hunting channels, where the declaration said I would never do or use a certain or respond to a certain channel versus what they actually do and how they react to it. What's also important, and I know I spent some time on it during the introduction, but I do believe it's very important to mention it. When you have in your surroundings people who give career advice and want to share their tips and tricks, we do believe that they do so with their best intentions at heart. But what's important to remember is the tips and tricks you usually receive is from their one personal and professional opinion, experience, and preference, but they do not represent the market. So it's important when receiving career advice to make sure to check your source of data. Is it their opinion, or do they base their advice on collected data? And what's also important, make sure if you ask for advice to collect input from at least 10 people from within your target group. So your potential boss, which we'll be discussing later today, and not from your peers, because your peers, what's important for your peers might not be important for your potential boss, and vice versa. Okay, and one thing, and this is why I stress this element so much, data often contradicts experience, and we see that in all 4 modules, and it also contradicts our own experience, and we'll see that even today. So COVID-19, the reason for those webinars, we've gone from an employee market to an employer market overnight, which means that there are more candidates than recruitment processes. We immediately prepared a job search and career management guide. And we're still the only career services and outplacement company that offers part of the services for free. I checked again in the morning, none other big corporation has decided to put their resources at the service of job searching candidates who need it the most. And therefore, we've decided to do crowdfunding by PayPal. Now, COVID and the effects. As you can see, we have been tracking a very specific KPI for 10 weeks already, so that's 2.5 months, to track and what are those numbers? What is 87,036 or 173,003? This is the number of published job ads on LinkedIn, and as I mentioned at the beginning, every time it is not a perfect KPI, because the fact that job ads disappear doesn't mean that those recruitment processes disappear from the job market. It might mean that they were taken off LinkedIn because of costs, and they have been moved to local or cheaper alternative, or that they decided to recruit using their employees, etc. However, even if it's for cost purposes, it is an indication of what's been going on the market. So when you have a look, these are our 18 main markets from Career Angel's perspective. You can see that so far 3 countries have improved their situation over what's happening 10 weeks ago. The others, let's say Germany, the number of job ads is down by 54.30%. This is in absolute numbers, minus 1.4 million job ads. We then extended the monitoring, actually among others, thanks to the open webinar participants, we decided to extend our monitoring to 36 countries in Europe. And here you can see a week to week comparison, week 22 to week 23, minus 6.8%. And week 21 to week 23, minus 13. So the decrease is decreasing. There you go. So there is a positive tendency here. So that's good news. Okay, now that we see how it's going, we obviously need a job search strategy, which we said consists of 4 steps. Step number 1 is to define your goals. Step number 2 is to define your unique selling proposition, which we did in module 1. Then we looked at how to prepare 2 CVs, one for the humans, one for the bots, and how to optimize your LinkedIn profiles. We did that in module 2. And during our today's third module, we will discuss how to use all 4 job hunting channels. And next module is one of my favorite topics, which is how to prepare for interviews, especially online. Okay, so what are the 4 job hunting channels? And this is the first very counterintuitive thing data shows us. Speculative introduction, meaning contacting your direct boss directly, your potential future boss directly, is followed by networking, followed by executive search firms, and followed by job ads. And I say followed by because I'm already thinking 1 slide ahead, which is the average of success rate looking at the last 3 years. Normally, when I ask somebody, well, what do you think? What is the most effective job hunting channel when looking for a job? The majority would say networking, executive search firms, but very rarely do people say it's actually contacting your potential boss directly. So the speculative introduction. So this is already one very counterintuitive aspect, especially when talking about experienced managers or executives. In other words, if you're a CEO looking for a CEO level job, you would get in touch with the CEO that you would report to, either at the regional headquarters or a global headquarter. Okay, so let's start with the most effective job search channel, which is direct approach, or also called speculative introduction. It has an efficiency of 45.67% looking at the last 3 years, and it means to contact decision makers, so your potential boss, at minimum 75 to 90 well-selected companies directly by email. If you've been following our literature, you might find 60, 30 or 60 companies. Given that we are in uncertain times with a lot of candidates on the job market, our recommendation is to extend that list to 75 to 90 companies right away and not wait to see whether 30 would be enough or not. Okay, if you don't have time, in other words, if you don't have a financial cushion, then right away extend the list to even 90 to 120 right away. Or if you know that you can't stay at home much longer for another 2 or 3 months, then just prepare a longer list of companies. IT support just let me know that for some reason the live transmission on Facebook is not working. So what we'll do, we'll post on our Facebook company page an invitation to join Click Meeting directly. Sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, good. And well selected means that those companies are in line with the goal, which we discussed in and during module 1. Sourcing, meaning preparing a list of companies in line with the goal. A quick review means to choose the path of the least resistance, meaning choosing the most obvious fit from your today's position. In other words, which companies will see the biggest benefit in hiring you. So you can prepare a list of companies looking at criteria by industry, by the type of problems they are having, meaning that you could potentially solve, by the size of the company, by their origin, meaning what could be that their certain set of language skills is important, by rankings, by the level of maturity, by location geography, by the type of ownership. So by industry, here, one of the easiest ways to prepare a list of company is to actually go to Wikipedia. You can Google rankings, industry rankings. You can search for market reports. So this is actually the easiest way to prepare a list of companies or industry portals. Then we have the criteria or the approach selecting companies by the type of problems they're having. So the approach here would be to define the problems you can solve, and it's usually directly or indirectly to help them make money or save money. Examples: post-merger integration, bad opinions on job portals, cost optimization, bad customer reviews, increase in sales, etc. Where do you find the type of information? You can track the media, you can track your own KPIs, reviews, rankings. You can ask your network, well, if you have a company that is having problem with their IT system, with their service provider, with their training company, etc., let me know. Good. Then the next one, by size. That's also not too difficult. Size, small and medium-sized enterprises or corporations can be expressed in the number of people they employ, how much they're making, so the turnover, where they are present, number of branches, number of cities, number of countries. And here again, some say, why would that be important? Because the size of a company can be an indication of the type of corporate culture, how stable a company potentially is, how fast they are when it comes to making decisions. So how many level of hierarchies there are. If you like speed, the big corporation is probably not the way to go. And you can look by origin. So that's particularly important for those who are foreigners in a country where the local language is important, because that can be an obstacle during the job search if you're not fluent in the local language. So what you can then do is find companies that are from your country or your language group, because they will be less demanding when it comes to local language skills. Example, you are from Argentina, working in Germany or studying in Germany, and you want to find a job in Germany. So you would look for Argentinian companies that are based in Germany, and then extend it to the language group and look for Latin American, Spanish-speaking Latin American companies that are from Spanish-speaking Latin American countries that have a presence, for example, in Germany. Where can you find them? On the internet. You can look at the memberships of the chambers of commerce. The other way to go about it, find companies that are from your new country with a presence in your home country or language group that might need your language culture skills. So that's the same thing, but the other way around. So that would be German companies in Latin America, or particularly in Argentina, if I continue with the example from before. And again, here you look for chambers of commerce, etc. If you are a general manager or if you work in sales, here's a tip. You can make two separate lists. One, a list of companies that are already in the country, and a list of companies that are not yet in the country but in similar neighboring countries. So when approaching them as a CEO, as a sales director, you could say, listen, I see that your company already has a presence in France, in Austria, in Switzerland, and Poland, but there is nobody yet in Germany, maybe you'd like to set up a structure in Germany, or have at least a sales rep there. Okay, so rankings and awards. Sometimes it's important for a certain reason that there is a certain corporate culture. So you can look at the rankings as the Great Place to Work ranking. You can look at best employers, best places to work by Glassdoor, Fortune 100 best companies to work by, Great Place to Work. Now, what's important to take here into consideration is that the majority of those rankings are paid, so companies paid to participate in them. Still, I mean, it is another source to find companies that you want to work for. Then you can also look for friendliness, mother or mom friendly workplaces, etc. Then what's also relatively easy to find is rankings or awards that are connected to creativity, innovation, fast growing. Deloitte has very good reports, the Fast 50, Central Europe, for example, and there's so many more. So I also encourage you to look for market reports from Big Four. Then level of maturity. It's not everybody's piece of cake to cup of tea, not piece of cake. It's not everybody's cup of tea to work for a startup, maybe it's a backed startup, so some startup that has already received the first round of financing, maybe a third round of financing. You can look at a company that is intensively expanding or stable, or that they have been on the market for quite some time. So whatever reflects your needs the most. Then you can also go and look for companies by location and geography. One thing, especially if you need to be close to home for some reason, you can check out tenants of the closest office buildings, and you might be surprised to learn what kind of companies are actually in your closest vicinity. Then you can look for regional, local, global headquarters that are close by. You can open Google Maps and search on Google Maps. A comment on the chat: work at startup is not a piece of cake for me. That's why it's not my cup of tea. Exactly, that's what I meant. Thank you very much for rephrasing that. So going back to Google Maps, you actually, when you use Google Maps, search for specific keywords, but also go from very specific keywords to broad keywords. Try to search in both English and the local language. And here an example, if for some reason you were to look for a job in Sevilla, Spain, you can look for a broad keyword, recursos humanos, and you already have like 10 pins to double check, and then you can look at the keywords that the companies used, and selección or consultora, and start using and combining those keywords to generate a list of companies that are close by. Good, then we have type of ownership. You can decide whether you want to work for a private owner. And here in parentheses, we've added normal private owner versus rich private owner, meaning, and this is especially for those at the board level, working for a private owner that is regularly ranked as the top 5, top 10, top 50 millionaires of a country. That is usually associated with a certain volatility, relatively frequent change of the board. So also to take that into consideration. Then we have family owned, that has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages being whether they allow non-family members into the board. It is now currently a big topic, looking at COVID and what's happening. More and more family-owned businesses do ask themselves, maybe we should hire a professional external board member to get us through the next couple of years. Type of ownership could also be a partnership, a holding, a corporation, traded on the stock exchange, etc. Here we have a question on the chat. Is there any clue for consulting firms? This is another type of companies, yes. And here you would do exactly the same kind of sourcing to understand what kind of consulting firms could be interested in your profile, and you do the sourcing, preparing the list in a very similar manner. You can look for consulting firms who are already offering the types of services that you could be delivering, and you could approach consulting firms that don't offer the services yet, and you could be the first one to do so. You can look at companies that are co-owned or fully owned by private equity or venture capital funds. So how do you go about that? Step number one, as we already discussed thoroughly, you make a list of companies, which we call sourcing. Once you have the list of companies, you need to identify your potential boss. Step number three, find their direct email address. And how do you do that? To find your potential boss, you log on to platforms like LinkedIn, Xing, or sometimes there are local platforms, and you do the research. You can check the company website, Google or Yahoo, and definitely use both search engines because they use a different algorithm, which means you will see different search results. And simply ask your network, especially if your potential boss is not necessarily the general manager or the head of IT. If it's something more specific, not everybody is yet on LinkedIn, although more than 90% of professionals, I believe. So use your network as well. And some might not have realized what changed between the two slides. So this slide says find your potential boss, and the next slide says find their email address. And the email address is exactly the same sources of information: LinkedIn, company website, Google, and ask your network. Now, what's important when it comes to identifying your email address, you need two pieces of information. One is their name, and the other one is the structure of the email address in that organization. And once you have those two pieces of information, you can deduct the direct email address. How do you find email addresses? Here are a couple of tips. If they're traded on the stock exchange, you can look for investor relations, for the investor relations tab, and then click, and it's usually either IR at and then the domain, or actually a direct contact person, or you can download reports, and somewhere at either at the very beginning or at the very end is who prepared your report and the direct email addresses. You can also look for media contacts. Social media specialists are very often bit more generous when it comes to sharing their contact details. HR contact person. And here on the chat there is a question. How do you find your potential boss in a really big company where it's difficult to get an idea about the company structure from open sources? Okay. Really, actually, with the really big companies, they're actually very often more transparent than the medium-sized companies. So I would look for, probably on the website, try to understand the overall company structure. And then on LinkedIn, if you, for example, choose a rather big country, I don't know, Coca-Cola in Germany, and then you have 1,200 employees, and then you narrow it down to a certain location, then you can see, okay, there, and you start looking at the different names of the positions, so you start deducting, okay, this could be here, this person probably reports there. So this is really playing or being a little bit of an internet detective. Plus, also have a look at your network and figure out maybe there are people in a network who used to work for those companies and who can help you with that as well. Then there are sites like hunter.io or email-format.com where they help you, or they suggest with a certain level of certainty or probability that this is, and they suggest then the format of the email address, most email format most likely used at that organization. I think I need a sip of water. Good. One thing we'll do after today's webinar, Marcelina will add a link to download a full guide of how to find email addresses. So you can, and there is really a step-by-step guide of how to identify the right person and their email addresses. And then step 4, so we said step 1, make a list of companies. Step 2, find your potential boss. Step 3, find their email address. Step 4, contact them. Here on the chat, I have a new suggestion from Claudio. If I can suggest to exploit Google single code plus. So Claudio's, if you can read Claudio's comment. So of course, when using Google search, there are obviously abbreviations, and that's part that is included in the guide we're sharing afterwards. But thank you very much for mentioning that. Okay, so when you contact them, what's important is to remember that we don't want to overwhelm the reader and take it one step at a time. Which means that when reaching out, the first thing somebody sees is the subject line, which then leads to the reader, to the recipient, to either click on the email or delete it. And how the email, the cover email is formulated, that person will then either click on the CV or delete the email. And the quality of the CV, which we discussed last module, then leads to a screening call or delete, etc. Okay, so contact your potential boss. This is a question out to all of you. What would you add in the subject line when reaching out to your potential superior in a company you really want to work for? What ideas do you have? What would you include in the subject line? Name of potential position. That is one example. Let's see what the others are. Or name of type of project. In the meantime, I'll confirm online streaming, live online streaming on Facebook. Is it? No, still not working. Okay. Personal value proposition, question mark. Okay, so whether to include the unique selling proposition. Okay, introduction, partnership, their pain and how we can address it if we know that. Okay, I see 2 more people are typing, so I'll wait for some ideas. You have to sell a solution to their common problems. If you have that solution and if you know about their problems, yes. Okay, good. Now, the most common subject lines are usually name and CV. My favorite, all written in caps lock. Looking for a job, CV. Do you want to increase sales? Now, all of these subject lines, I'd say, is a big no, because they communicate, I'm looking for a job, I might even be desperate. So this is a no. What we want to achieve is to find a subject line that is neutral, enigmatic, that says, I'm not desperate. This is a business as usual email, so not something completely extraordinary out of the blue, but something your potential boss would usually receive and clicks on it, even by mistake. Could be, and some of you have suggested it, executive team, sales team, direct contact, etc. Now, here is another comment. If you research someone in a company, a hint could be to use the key. Okay. What Claudio is suggesting is actually a continuation of how to use Google. Is that correct? I think so. Okay. Back to the slides. Okay, yes. When you contact your potential boss, tips of how to write the cover email. So we know the subject line, not too desperate, business as usual kind of thing. And then the cover email itself should be written to the point. Here we add what do you have to offer, not what do I want. These are two different motivation letters. It should definitely be personalized. So here an example. Dear Mr. Smith, I'm getting in touch with you to inquire whether Coca-Cola is considering strengthening its team of IT professionals or its executive team, its board, etc. So the first line is about why you are getting in touch with them. If so if you're considering it, please allow me to introduce myself or briefly about myself. And then we basically summarize the profile summary. In other words, here we use and communicate your unique selling proposition, which means you need a really good CV and a unique profile summary. Okay. So as already mentioned before, it's what is your potential value, or one of you phrased it, what's your value proposition, and not what is in it for me. And then you add anything else that's relevant, for example, the languages that you speak in or the languages that you work in, that you are open to relocation, etc. Then, so if so briefly about myself, and then you have about 3 to 5 bullet points. Please find attached my CV with documented successes. And there you add, if it is relevant to your group, to your target group, and to your own position, you add business cases or a project portfolio. Who adds that? Anybody who looks for a job at a board level, and project portfolio for people who actively work in IT and project management, and lawyers. And then you add, but lawyers call it a transaction list. And then you say, I'd appreciate your brief feedback, kind regards, and that's it. So step number 4, you contact them. Step number 5, you follow up within 7 to 10 business days if you have not received an answer. Any questions before I move on to Headhunters? I know I'm going through the topics rather fast. Before I move on to Headhunters, any questions as to how to use that channel, how to source companies, or how to identify your potential boss, find email addresses, how to write the proper cover email? If you have any questions here, we can do that now. Give you a minute. No questions. Okay, then let's continue with Headhunters. So Headhunters, to understand how to write to Headhunters, we need to understand how they work. Headhunters before coronavirus would receive on average 50 unsolicited CVs per day. Unsolicited means they have not asked for them. So it's candidates finding their email addresses and contacting them directly proactively. 50 CVs per day is 250 CVs per week. 1,000 CVs per month and 12,000 CVs per year for one person. This is not per company, but this is per consultant in a recruitment firm. And that headhunter, on top of passively receiving so many CVs, they usually have anywhere between 5 and 15 parallel ongoing recruitment projects that very often they need to close because they are paid based upon success. So there's high pressure on speed, and they have their own KPIs. Some recruitment companies are here a bit more aggressive than others. KPIs can mean how many business development calls you make per day, how many sales or client meetings you have, etc., etc. So this is a high pressure environment with lots of emails, lots of deadlines, lots of sales targets, etc. Now, this is before coronavirus. During coronavirus, they're flooded with CVs, as you can probably imagine. So what does that mean now from a candidate's perspective? Again, if you've tracked our literature, you will see that we used to recommend getting in touch with 30 to 40 headhunters. Our recommendation now is to reach out to more than 50 headhunters per country, unless the country is city-driven. City-driven countries are Germany, the United States, so where there are more than 3 or 4 big cities outside of the capital. Poland could be partly a city-driven country, meaning that the ecosystem around Frankfurt is big enough to reach out to recruiters independently in Frankfurt and independently in Berlin and independently in Munich, etc. And why now more than 50? Because more than 50 also means reaching out to smaller organizations, not only the top 10 or the biggest 10, etc. Companies, from a company perspective, working with the top 10 or the best 10 or the largest 10 recruitment agencies usually also means increased costs. In times of crisis, companies need to reduce costs. We can very much imagine that companies will try to find alternative local solutions that are not worse in terms of quality. So it's good to diversify the list of headhunters and also reach out to smaller ones, including freelancers. Headhunters, the type of headhunters, you can find generalists, or they specialize in roles or industry, sometimes both. I already mentioned that they are paid upon success, or the type they're paid in a retained form, which means that they are paid in stages depending on the stages of the recruitment process, irrespectively of success. And usually, and it doesn't matter if it's success or in stages, recruitment firms would receive anywhere between 10 and 33% of the gross annual remuneration, spelling mistake, of the candidates, of the hired candidate salary. Okay, where do you find recruiters? You can find them on Google rankings. If you type in best recruitment firm Berlin or Rome, you'll immediately have lists. LinkedIn, you can see what type of recruitment companies or executive search firms publish job ads. And for those who are experienced managers and executives, you can look up the members on aesc.org, and aesc.org is the Association of Executive Search and Leadership Consultants. So those are in vast majority retained executive search firms that recruit at board level, sometimes board -1. Where do you find the email address? This is usually an easy one because they do publish it on the website or LinkedIn or Xing. However, having said that, contact them first by email, not by LinkedIn or Xing. Attach your CV in PDF, knowing that it's very likely they'll ask about an open format later. Why don't we send the open format right away? Because very often the open format gets scrambled up on the screen, as we saw in the previous module. So first send it in PDF. Once you've made a good impression, they'll say, oh, please send me the open format. And even if it's scrambled up, they won't care anymore. They just want to be able to copy paste it, for example, into a report or a database. Here are tips on how to write the cover email. Define your box and help them read. I'll show you in a bit. A good subject line would be actually the type of role you're applying to or that you're interested in. And the text here, I'd like to ask you if your colleagues are currently recruiting for, and then the name of the role, and at the location if it's relevant. My profile, and here you summarize the unique selling proposition, but it's even shorter than as if you're writing to your potential boss. Attached my CV, and that's it. So when using Headhunters as a channel, step number 1, make a list of those, make a list of companies. Step number 2, find the most relevant consultant. Step number 3, find their email address. Step number 4, contact them. Step number 5, follow up within 7 to 10 business days if you haven't received any response. Now let's look at the differences between the cover emails to Headhunters and your potential employer. In terms of length, to the Headhunter is short, to top, meaning your top employer, is still short, but a little bit longer. Level of detail. With the Headhunter, you define the box because at first sight, you need to understand, am I currently working, or is there any chance for me to be in the future be working on a certain type of role? And this is a very quick reaction at a yes or no. Here's the question: what is a box? A box is the role. So are you a sales director? Then you're in the sales director box. Or are you an operations manager? Then you are in the operations manager box. So the box means the label you put on yourself as a candidate. So they need to know, are you a general manager who makes 10,000 euro or a general manager who makes 50,000 euro a month? So that's the box. So they know through their own filters if you are a potentially relevant candidate for them or their colleagues at the firm. With the potential bosses, you also add your successes and your potential added value. Personalization with the Headhunter, how you address the person is enough. With the top, you saw there was an XXX name of company, so you also make sure to personalize name plus you mentioned the company by name. Attachments, with the Headhunters, only the CV. With your potential employers, if it's relevant to you, also add the business cases. Okay, I'm really rushing through this today. Do you have any questions as to the Headhunters? Okay, somebody's typing a question. In the meantime, I'll answer a question that was not asked. Oh, okay. And I just guessed, because that was Claudio asked the question that I wanted to answer. When it comes to business cases, the way they're structured and how to approach them. So especially if you're a manager and there are certain problems you can help a company solve, you would think about the last usually 3 to 5 years and say, okay, can I describe a business case that demonstrates that I have a certain competency, a certain skill? Let's say digitalization of processes. Have you done that? Maybe yes, maybe no. If you have done that, then think of a business case where you can describe what was the context, the initial situation, the challenge, etc. Once you have that, then you add, what did you do to fix that problem? So what were the actions? And at the end, you add our results. So we had either STAR, situation, task, action, results, or CAR, context, challenge, action, result. And here the rule is to have one business case per page. So again, it shouldn't overload or overwhelm the recipient of that. Why do business cases work? Because in a business case, you can add a higher level of detail than what you usually would have on the CV. Plus, you can also add your philosophy, your approach, something again that doesn't really fit into the CV. So especially for those at a board level looking for a job, I mean, contacting your potential boss directly, it is rather unlikely for them to say, oh, fantastic, I was actually looking for a new finance director. That is unlikely. So with the business cases, the CV alone could say, oh, but I already have a finance director, I don't need that person. But with well-prepared business cases, they can open up business cases and say, oh, this person was able to decrease working capital, achieve those financial results, was able to renegotiate credits. My person hasn't been able to do that for the last 2 years. Maybe at least I'll have a chat. So the business cases help increase or generate interest for the candidate. I hope that makes sense. Then here I have another question. What can you do when the headhunters are not following up on the discussion and not answering to your follow-up? You ignore them and move on. Ignore them and move on. One thing that I would do irrespectively is make sure that irrespectively of whether the headhunter responded to you or not, make sure to send them personalized messages, connection requests on LinkedIn. So make sure you grow your LinkedIn, and why that's important we discussed in our last module. So I'd say, dear Barbara, in reference to our correspondence, I'd like to invite you to my network. Now, doesn't matter that the correspondence was one-sided because Barbara never replied, doesn't matter. So just make sure that at least you grow the network and increase the chances of other people finding you through them. Here a follow-up question, is that something like a star report? Yes, that's what I meant, exactly. Okay, good. Then let's move on to inbox management. What does that mean? Inbox management is what we have now been discussing. What happens if I follow up, they don't answer? What's behind that? So as you can see, with the headhunters and the direct approach, we have sourcing, contact them, follow up. So these things we here have in common. Question to you: if you were to contact 100 potential bosses, how many do you think will respond to your email? And if you know, don't say it. Okay, 5%, 3, 5%, 1 to 2. Then here's a comment: it depends on how well we target them and how we write the message. Well, this is obviously under the assumption that you've selected the right companies and identified the right potential bosses. Okay, so here I see you're rather conservative, anywhere between 1 and 10%. One person said maybe 30%. Okay, then I'm even afraid to ask you if you're so conservative or negative or pessimistic to say, okay, if only 1 or 2 respond, that means nobody will invite you to an interview. Well, what do you think? How many would then invite you to an interview? Okay, here I see 2 interview invitations. A couple of more people typing. Let's see your ideas. 1 to 2. So it's almost as many as actually would have responded or reacted to your emails. Okay, so here again, this is something counterintuitive where data wins against our intuition. Now, before I show you the results, I forgot my question about the headhunters. If you contact 100 headhunters, and now just from a feeling point of view, do you think the headhunters will respond more or less than the company when contacting the potential bosses, when contacting business? Okay, oh, that's very interesting. Have more, less, more, less, more, less. Okay, so here I can see you disagree to disagree. Fantastic. Okay, so let's see what the numbers say. The numbers say the following, and here I first will define that. Response rate is the reaction of effectively contacted people out of the whole pool. And effectively contacted people means I've sent the first email and I've sent a follow-up email. If you don't send a follow-up email, this KPI does not count. So a good response rate or an average response rate that we at Career Angels achieve. Okay, first an example. The slides are smarter today than me. So if 37 CEOs react of 95 effectively contacted, just to show you how it's calculated here, the response rate would be 38.9%. Okay, average good response rates are between 30 and 50%. For both companies and headhunters, if your response rates are lower, something isn't right. And the interview rate is interviewed by effectively contacted out of the whole pool. So not interview rates by those who responded, but interview from the whole pool. And a good interview rate here would be 5 to 10%. If it's lower, it means something's not right. So in summary, a good response rate or an average response rate is 30 to 50%. An average interview rate is 5 to 10%. Anything below those numbers, something not quite right. And we'll soon see what could be improved here. So if it's below, you definitely should review the whole process, meaning, is the goal right? Have you defined your USP? Is the USP visible in your CV? Do you have an ATS CV? Is your LinkedIn profile optimized? Do you have the right subject line? What about the cover email? Are there maybe formatting mistakes in the CV, etc., etc.? So definitely audit the whole process. Now, what happens if you have good but low KPIs? Meaning you got in touch with 100 companies, but not 50 responded, but only 30. Yeah, 50 responded, which means 70 did not respond. Contact an alternative decision maker. Okay, so the CEO didn't respond. Maybe there's a deputy CEO or the COO. And then again, 30 responded out of the whole, 40% did not respond. Then you find a second alternative decision maker. Okay, so the CEO didn't respond, the COO neither. Maybe there is a matrix organization and you should be reaching out to the regional head of sales because you're a sales director. So when we visualize that, and I know that looks a bit much, but let's look at it systematically. So when you see the first level inbox management, it starts with the first email. So you send out the first email to 100 potential bosses and 50 headhunters, and then a couple of things can happen. You can receive a reply, an interview information, interview invitation, or no reply, which means you need to follow up. Once you follow up, there's no reply, thank you email, or an interview invitation. And once there is no reply after the follow-up, you send a first email to the alternative decision maker, and you play the whole thing through. So when looking at that, depending on the KPIs, you can run through 2 or 3 levels of that so-called inbox management. So RR is the response rate, it's both reaction, including invitation to an interview, and the interview rate is everybody who invites you to an interview. And here, interview also means the screening call. So even if it had not been properly scheduled, but somebody from HR, a recruiter, a headhunter calls you spontaneously for a 10-minute call, that is also an interview. You might have noticed that it doesn't say contact HR. It does say contact the business side. unless obviously you work in HR and your potential boss is the HR director. But other than that, we do not say contact HR. Why do you think that is? And there's now a question to you. Why do you think do we not recommend to contact HR? Okay, 5 people typing. I'm sure the others also have some ideas, so feel free to type. We have time. I'm rushing through this today. Okay, HR will direct you to the company website or job board. HR will respect what is given by the business leaders. HR are not decision makers. Here is one that says they're already overloaded. They only work in service of the departments that need the position to be filled. They have less feeling about the needed skills within the organization or a department. Because in the screen call and interview, the personal chemistry matters. Okay, so that's why first business, then HR. Okay, all of you are right. All of you are right, and because sometimes there are people who say, nah, I still want to do, I mean, I'm a CFO, it doesn't really look good, or I don't feel comfortable with getting in touch with the CEO. I'd contact HR. If you decide to take that shortcut, it will not be a shortcut, it will actually be a detour, because the response rate is then 0 to 5% for all the reasons you have just mentioned. Okay, do you have any questions about inbox management at this point? Before I move on to networking. Yes, one person is typing, so I'll wait for the question. As you can see, instead of doing a big Q&A at the very end, I'm making sure that I'm answering your questions as we go from section to section of today's module. Okay, here I have a comment. It is true with the HR reactions, unfortunately, yes. What I would say to comment on that, from a proactive candidate's perspective, human resources, the human resources department is usually the least human element in the recruitment process because of the low response rate. And they should actually be the first one to respond and acknowledge at least, yes, we've seen you as a candidate. Here the question is, how much should we insist to have an interview when contacting headhunters? No need to insist, because either you fit or you don't fit. This is something very common where candidates, especially with experienced candidates, they very often, and I've heard that, I mean, I used to be a recruiter myself, where candidates would say, I don't want to talk to you. You put me in front of the client and I will convince them. Now, especially with such an attitude, the recruiter will even with more force decline your candidacy, because at the end of the day, they vouch for the candidate. So if a candidate is particularly insistent, you're automatically moved to, let's say, a mental blacklist. Here, there's a follow-up comment. I mean, the interview with a headhunter, same thing. So if you sometimes, okay, the candidate insists to be allowed to interview with the client, but there are also candidates who insist on interviewing with the headhunter. And again, imagine that you have 12,000 people, 12,000 CVs insisting on 1 hour interviews with the headhunter. It is just humanly, physically not possible to interview every single candidate. And now the headhunter If they see on the screen, if the CV is well prepared and they see I can use that candidate, they will immediately call you. If they see I might use this candidate, they could reach out to you and say, okay, let's do an intro meeting. I have time in 2 to 3 weeks. But if you don't fit, it means talking to you is busy work. I just spoke a couple of weeks ago to an executive search consultant that is now bombarded, obviously, with CVs and phone calls from candidates who want to chat, who want to career advice. And he says, I'm sorry, but that's not my job. My job is to find candidates, the best fit of candidates for my ongoing processes. And that's what I'm paid for by my clients. So now, let's say a recruiter has 40 hours of their time and 10 hours are spent with clients. And then there are candidates who try to force themselves onto the schedule where they could be 1 hour recruiter's time who must be doing business development is 1 hour not spent on making money for the client. So what I'm trying to say with this, do not insist on getting an interview with a headhunter. If they see that you fit, they will get in touch with you. Okay, good. Networking. As we said, networking has an efficiency of 29%. With networking, it's important to be systematic and consistent, which also means that you should get in touch with your network 3 to 9 months prior to the job search, depending on how complex your job search goal is. And we talked about complexity in the first module. Now, I understand that not everybody has those 3 to 9 months, but need to start immediately. And then especially you need to be strategic and purposeful. What does that mean? How do you get started? And here, if you haven't used networking yet in a strategic and purposeful manner, I do recommend taking notes. This topic is, as the previous topics, not a fluffy, you have to be nice and look for things to reciprocate, etc. kind of networking approach. This really is about auditing your network, Excel spreadsheets, etc. So I recommend taking notes. So how do you get started with networking? You audit your network. You divide them into active, passive, and none. I'll explain all these things in detail. You identify areas for improvements, and you prepare and implement a strategy. And I will be explaining all of those 4 points in detail. So let's start with the audit of what already exists. Step number 1, add all your contacts to LinkedIn. Why LinkedIn? Because LinkedIn allows you to export your contacts to an Excel spreadsheet. And Excel allows you then to manipulate the database. One important thing, if you decide to do this strategically, the export to the export of your contacts from LinkedIn to a file needs to be, you need to ask LinkedIn for the download, and sometimes this can take a couple of minutes or sometimes a couple of hours. So if you say, okay, now I have 2 hours to do my networking strategy, make sure you do the first 2 steps, or at least the export step, a couple of hours in advance, so you don't have to simply sit waiting for LinkedIn to release the downloads of your archive. Okay, so you export it to an Excel file, then you delete unnecessary columns and add minimum 3 additional columns. Those columns will be the type of relationship you have with those contacts, might be personal or business. If they are strategic in your job search, yes or no, and the level of trust on a scale from 1 to 10. Of course, not all of your contacts will be on LinkedIn. So between B and C, there is one more step. If anybody is missing, you add them manually to the list. You can go through your phone book, through your, I don't know, Facebook, through your old email address, and add them manually. Then, and for example, here's another column option to add language, whether you're on a first name basis with them, etc. And then you qualify that, which means if you have a network of 2,000 people, you actually qualify 2,000 people, which also means that this is a good part to clean out your network and delete people who simply don't know you added maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago because you were growing your network, but you actually have never met this person, you have never interacted with this person. So really qualify all the contacts and then sort the file and divide them into segments. So you can sort them then and make combinations of, okay, sort by level of trust. And then you have from 10 to down 10, 9, 7, 6, 3, etc. And then you can sort the file by type of relationship. So you can have high segments, high level trust segments, personal, high level trust segments, professional. And for each of those sub-segments, so usually if you add to that the type of language that you communicate with, then if you're on a first name basis, how long you've known somebody, etc., you probably come up with 5 to 10 subgroups within your database. And then you prepare strategies for each of those subgroups to say, okay, if they're personal and there's a high level of trust, I'll give them a phone call. And I'll tell them straightforward, listen, I've been affected by COVID. If you hear of a company that is looking for a finance manager, please let me know. And then you might find a type that could be very strategic for a job search, but there's a low level of trust. Then you need a different strategy to say maybe first to send an email, or instead of an email, maybe try to reach out by sending a message on LinkedIn, etc. So you prepare strategies for each of the segments, and preparing strategies means also preparing the right texts for each of the channels. So here, different strategies will mean different channels, different approach. With some, it can be straightforward. With some, you need 2 or 3 emails. You prepare the texts, which can be the different languages, the level of detail that you include in them. And what's super important, what's very often ignored or forgotten, is to add a call to action, meaning what is it that you actually want from them? Do you want them to hire you? Do you want them to share market info? Do you want them to share concrete company names? Do you want them to help you identify your potential boss in an organization? So make sure to add a call to action. And anything else that's important. Okay, and then G, implement those strategies. While doing that, while auditing the old network, you will usually already realize where you have certain areas of improvement. You might realize, I don't really know anybody outside my industry, and I should. Or I don't really know enough people at board level, and I should. So, or I don't know enough HR people, or I don't know enough headhunters. So you identify areas of improvement, which means you can then research whatever's missing online, LinkedIn, Xing intonations, offline, which slowly in some countries is starting again. And again, for each of those areas, you prepare and implement strategies. Hold on, the presentation is not responsive. Okay. So with online and offline events and contact, if you, for example, you're part of, could be part of open webinar participants group on LinkedIn or Facebook, you can research your co-members and see, okay, who could I reach out to? So this is also a new network that you can use to your advantage. If you get in touch, especially at some point over the phone, make sure you have an appropriate elevator pitch, which is your auto presentation, which is your unique selling proposition, which changes depending on your target group. And that's also something that you will be using at the beginning of an interview, which we will be discussing in the 4th module. After online, offline events, make sure to send a personalized note and the LinkedIn invite. Now, if you decide to use the open webinar group for participants on LinkedIn and you reach out to your fellow group members, please personalize the LinkedIn invite. If you decide to do it through the mobile phone, instead of clicking connect, click on more and then personalize invite. I'll make sure, let me make a note. Personalize mobile invites. I'll make sure to repost that on our group so you know how to do that. Okay. What are the most common mistakes when it comes to networking? Usually it's done too late. People are either too pushy, or the other let's say extreme, they're not direct enough, which often is because of certain assumptions, especially with people we know well personally. We assume that our friends know what we do for work. So we send them our CV sending, oh, if you hear something attached is my CV. What does that mean, hear something? So make sure that you have a very well-defined call to action and that your friend means hear something. What does that mean? So make sure you define that for them. Some have no strategy at all. They randomly network, and by randomly networking, and this is something where we cheat ourselves, because networking randomly means I don't start with the most strategic people. And this is something our clients often do when qualifying the database. Not a lot of people actually sit down and do the proper qualification. And if they do, so if they actually say, okay, I understand this is important and I'll go through over 2,000 contacts, they sometimes cheat themselves by qualifying potentially strategic people as non-strategic, because it means they won't have to get in touch with them. Which here, my recommendation between the lines, start with the strategic ones. Don't cheat yourself out of potentially really good opportunities. Then when it comes to networking, here I'd say the misuse of social media, because people want to take shortcuts. So instead of reaching out personally to the network one by one, even if it's 1,500 or 200 emails, they use the tagline or posts. So let me share a couple of examples from that. So using in a tagline on LinkedIn, or the headline also called looking for a job, looking for a new challenge, open to new challenges, opportunities. And here I've selected on purpose examples from the United States, because this is where we have the least clients and participants. Unemployed at looking for a job now. Looking for a job now. Looking for a job at actively looking for a job. And then you can see under currents, looking for a job at actively looking for a job. I'm currently unemployed and looking for my next opportunity. Actively looking for a job in Chicago, call +1, etc. And that's a recruiter. Still looking for a job at I don't have a job. Looking for a job at #pay the bills. You will see in all our literature, and that's one of the things that has not changed yet, we do not recommend posting or including in your tagline that you are looking for a job. There are other ways of letting your network know, even through LinkedIn, that you are open to new opportunities, and it's not by desperately in caps lock screaming, I'm looking for a job. Here an example, what happened from week 14 over to 15, there was an immediate increase of almost 6% of people who increased that, started using the tagline, looking for a new job, open to new challenges, looking for new challenges. There's no recruiter in this world who sits down in the morning, aside from having 100 emails on their inbox, and says, let me click through the candidates who are currently looking for a job. This is not how the job market works. The job market is driven by what the companies pay for, and then it doesn't matter whether or not you're looking for a job. Oh, I'm happy you find this entertaining, but for some reason, some people think that it increases the chances of their candidacy, but actually decreases it immensely. Here a couple of more examples of how to misuse social media. And by social media, I obviously mean LinkedIn. Posting your CV. This is a gold mine for hackers, especially if you include right away your contact details, your address. I mean, everything is there, even how many kids you have, etc. No. Here, this person at least hid partially their contact details, if you can see it in the left column, aside from the fact that it is the 2-column CV. But it does say 40 years old, and currently that person has, this recruitment manager has 2 kids that he calls 2 Smurfs that are 2 and 4 years old. It's sweet, but no, it is your personal data out there for everyone to grab. So if in the future you have problems with your credit cards, you see that you've bought something through PayPal, then you know where it comes from, because you have decided to publish your sensitive data on a platform like LinkedIn. And then my favorite. My favorite is frustrated candidates publicly shaming companies. Had an interview today scheduled by the company recruiter for the role. When I got there, they were shocked and had no record of my interview. The HR lady was on the phone and the receptionist said she'd be right out after the call. 30 minutes later, the receptionist came out and said they don't know what happened and to go home, and they'll email me to reschedule. Wow. I took off work to take this interview for this to happen. For the record, the recruiter was at interview was for what have you had happen as a bad interview experience? This is my most interesting interview to date. Hashtag bad interview, hashtag disrespect, and then adding a screen of, dear Russell, I'm sorry for the inconvenience this caused for you. The interview should have been canceled beforehand, blah, blah, blah. Now, if a candidate, I understand it can happen to everyone, and venting your frustration, this is definitely a red flag for other recruiters and headhunters to say, this candidate, if I ask this candidate the wrong question, they will post about it. If they don't like my questions, they might post about it on social media. So maybe this candidate should be avoided, etc., etc. So this is not the right way to vent frustrations. There are the portals where you can do that anonymously. You can do that privately on your, let's say, closed off Facebook, but not LinkedIn. And here, comment on the chat. Frustration is one thing, making it public is another one. Correct. Okay, so when it comes to networking, my recommendations, do 5 people per day, meaning contact 5 people per day. It's better if you don't have the time, the discipline, the something, at least set aside 5 to 10 minutes per day to reach out to 5 different people every single day. This is more than not doing anything. And it's realistic. I know I've stressed that a lot. and here I'll mention it again, start with the ones that you are most afraid of, that you most respect, or as they say in English, that give you the jitters. So I think, oh, I don't know, should I get in touch with them? That was my boss 5 years ago. This is a sign to say, yes, get in touch with them, because that means they're strategic and they can actually help you. Don't stop until you've actually signed a contract. Don't stop networking. Don't stop looking for a job until the moment you have signed an employment contract. And I'll talk about timing in a bit as well. In mature markets that are very competitive, you cannot afford not to do networking. It is a relatively slow channel, so it's not, from a timing perspective, the fastest channel is usually the direct approach. And then parallel in terms of speed, probably networking parallel to executive search firms, recruitment companies, but it's relatively slow. So I would recommend you to start with that immediately. Recommendations, particularly for LinkedIn, personalize your invite also on mobile. And I mentioned, I already made a note, I'll send you a screen on the group. So I encourage you to request access to the group, and I'll send you the screenshots on how to personalize your invites on mobile. Be purposeful and strategic also on LinkedIn, and use LinkedIn as a branding tool. Yes, you can use it for passive research and reading articles, but you can also use it to brand yourself as a potential candidate. So make sure you first cover the basics and you do have a good profile, and we covered that in module 2. And publish content for your target group. And here, what also happens very often, that even if there were good intentions, very often people who decide to publish content, they forget that they're publishing for the target group and not for their peers. So remember that to give your content the right spin so that it's actually for your target group. Share content of the people, companies you'd like to work for or with, so that it also increases your visibility on LinkedIn. And if you want to read further, and I'd have to say for the extroverts, I recommend Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. If you're more on the introvert side, I highly recommend Rainmaking by Fort Harding. It does say attract new clients no matter what your field, but it could as well say attract new potential employers no matter what your field. So everything we have been discussing today is also valid for freelancers and startuppers and business owners when it comes to attracting new clients. Okay, now job ads. Is it possible to block the invites? There are people I don't manage to send invitations to. Is it possible to block invites? I don't think so, unless you've already invited them and then they've blocked you. There are people I don't manage to send invitations to. The only thing what can happen is that there are people who say, I don't want any invites unless they have my direct email address. So this, yes, but it's, you can't block, let's say, everybody with a Gmail address from sending you invites, if that answers your question. Okay, any questions to what we've just discussed before I move on to job ads? No questions. Okay. Maciej, I'm happy you think this is valuable. Okay, good. Oh, wait. No. So job ads, they have a success or efficiency rate of 10.33% looking at the last 3 years. And here I'd like to share a review of the second module, and then invite you to review the second module, how to prepare CVs that fit ATS, how to optimize your LinkedIn profile for job ads, And that's also one of the tips. Ask the group members here on the open webinar for participants groups. Ask them to endorse your skills on your LinkedIn profiles. And it's really not magic to hack the job ads. And here I want to share something. It's an email I received on April 25th. And I've highlighted the most important bits. Dear Sandra, blah, I visited your workshop, blah, blah, blah. I used your script and especially the job scan page to optimize my CV. I got an invitation to interview. I recently signed my employment contract. And that person does say, I did it more as a test than thinking I'd actually have high chances to get that job. So, of course, it doesn't mean that if you follow the instructions that within 3 hours you will get an invitation to an interview, but it shows that working the job ads, hacking that, if you know how job ads work, look at the second module, use that to your advantage. There's really no magic behind it. It is a very non-romantic, very process-oriented process. I don't know how else to describe it. So use what you know about job ads. Okay, now timing. How long does it take to do inbox management, etc., etc.? Now, the timing that I'm sharing here is under the following assumption. The assumption is that everything is well prepared, and by everything, I really mean everything we've discussed so far. You use all 4 channels at the same time. So, in other words, you don't start networking the first week, job ads the second week, contacting headhunters the 4th week, and contacting companies the 6th week. It means you have preparation time, and once you've prepared everything, the goal, the unique selling proposition, the CVs, the LinkedIn profile, etc., and the sourcing and the you do everything in the same first week. With that assumption, and you contact 75 to 90 companies and about 50 headhunters per country, and you choose the path of the least resistance. So you're not looking at increasing your salary by 50% or for your next promotion. So you look for really the next obvious role. From a timing perspective, you usually, depending on how fast you are, you need 2 to 4 weeks of preparation time and then 8 to 12 weeks of job search time. And here I will add a little plus. It can be 8 to 12 plus weeks of job search time. Now, what does the plus mean? Why plus? So the plus will apply for people that are more senior. So the more senior you are, the more time you will be looking for a job. So board level and above, meaning regional roles. The plus also means that not all the companies have yet figured out if they want to hire especially senior people without face-to-face interviews. And this is a question mark, and that might then translate into longer job search time because not every company has yet decided how to handle the recruitment process in coronavirus times. The plus also means that, yes, we see overall in the markets a slight increase, but as you could see, for example, Germany, it has a decrease of more than 50% of job ads. So we don't know yet how bad it will actually be, and the worse it is, the longer the job search process. Having said that, our recommendation at Career Angels is to be flexible as to part-time contract and freelance options, especially with a freeze in headcounts that a lot of companies face. They can't hire somebody based on employment contract, but they still need the work to be done. So they hire freelancers or people that are open to issuing an invoice at the end of the month because they're not officially counted as part of the headcount. For some companies, especially we use this expression in the past, plug and play candidate. So if you're not an ideal candidate, but the organization sees there might be potential added value in cooperating with you, they might say, I'll give you this project. First, let's work on a project. And if I can see that you are really a low risk candidate, then we'll hire you and then you'll get an employment contract. Yes, independent contractors, exactly. Also be open to part-time. Being underemployed is better than being completely unemployed. First, from a financial income perspective, but also on the CV, because on the CV, you don't have to say that you don't have to say how many hours per week you've worked or what kind of contract links you to that current employer. Good. Before we go, and here actually before I go into before the Q&A part, any questions to you? Do you have any questions? As you can see, I definitely need my coffee, my afternoon coffee. Okay, a couple of people typing questions. That's good. Okay. What is senior nowadays? Okay, there are two different types of seniority. When I say senior, the more senior, the more time. This is seniority within an organization. It has nothing to do with your age. So it doesn't, there can be somebody that is 35 in a senior role and somebody who is 60 in a senior role. So seniority in that case does not mean age. On the job market, and that is something that I have a very strong opinion about, usually in the job market, 50 plus is the way you are asking the question. It is age related. So the job market would understand 50 plus as senior. Some portals or some authors want to challenge that and even say 45 plus is senior in terms of age. I personally and professionally have a strong opinion about that. We did actually one experiment and one, we looked at two different things. One is an experiment and the other thing is monitoring the data that we collect each year. So when we look at the data we collect each year, because we want to understand, is there any statistically significant difference between job searchers that are 50 plus and the others? And we couldn't find any difference other than the fact that those who are 50 plus, they look for a job a little bit longer. And a little bit longer is usually 2 to 3 weeks. And they have to be a little bit better at preparing the list of companies. So if somebody's 50 plus and targets only startups, that's not going to work. So here I need to be really good at preparing the unique selling proposition, finding companies that value mature candidates, etc. So a bit more companies need to be contacted, but the length, the only statistically significant difference is the length of the job search. But 2 weeks, one or the other way, it's not really an issue, right? Now, the other thing is, I mentioned the experiment last year. We took it upon ourselves to support 10 long-term unemployed 50-plus-year-olds. So that was an experiment to see, is what we say, can we defend what we say and what the data says? And our experiment, by supporting 10 people who were over 50 years old and longer unemployed longer than for 1 year, would they find a job with our methodology? And here I have to say, every person who followed our methodology to the dot, meaning everything we've just discussed, they found a job. And then there were those who wouldn't find that time, although the declaration was there, they wouldn't find the time to prepare a list of companies. They didn't want to really find the email addresses. They wouldn't send follow-up emails. Then, of course, it doesn't work. So I hope, Catherine, I've fully answered your question. Okay, next question. How about managing not only your contacts, but also whom to follow on your wall on LinkedIn? Does it matter for LinkedIn ranking if you have a contact and unfollow or follow him, her? LinkedIn ranking, I don't think so. I would say not that I know of. I don't think that, I mean, the only thing that happens if you unfollow somebody that you don't see their content anymore, but I can't see how that would affect overall how you are perceived by the LinkedIn algorithm. So I don't, that wouldn't, no. How can we find out which companies value mature candidates? Okay, that's a good question. I would say look at the board. Look at the board. If the board is over 60, definitely mature candidates. Look at board -1. If you see gray hair, if I'm maybe so practically and blunt, that means they value mature candidates. If there are diversity, if they do, for example, diversity campaigns, definitely yes. Look at there are diversity rankings there. If they have somebody, you can look for people inclusion positions on. If they have somebody that's head of diversity or inclusion, something that is a good signal that they want to be inclusive and diverse. Mature, hold on. I'm a little bit off topic. Okay, we have time, so we can go a little bit off topic. How effective is it to go directly to the company you want to work for? I mean, physically. Some recruiters suggest that it is a sign of interest in addition to the mail with your CV. I never believed that, actually. Oljana, I don't have data about that. It has happened once to me that a candidate who wanted to work for the recruitment company I worked for before setting up Career Angels, a candidate showed up saying, "Hi, I want to work with you. Here's my CV," which was super non-traditional. If you said some recruiters suggest that it is a sign of interest in addition to the mail, let's put it that way. I don't have data to support that claim or do the opposite. My intuition, which we already know isn't always the way to go, my intuition would say if it's other than really like working in retail, etc., I wouldn't see a manager show up at a headquarters saying, "Hey, I want to work with you." I don't see that. So I'd rather say no. But if you have data that disproves it, I'm very happy to look at it. Okay, good. Then another question. Mature candidates, companies are also country and culture specific, right? Question mark. Okay, I'll try to rephrase that question. That the definition of mature candidates can be country and culture specific. Yes, that's correct. For example, in the Middle East, junior means below 40. So they're actually look for candidates with gray hair. We've had 40-something-year-old candidates who are general managers been rejected because of being too young, for example. So yes, it can be country and culture specific. Then general question, not specifically related to the current situation. I would be ready to change the company only if they also offer a job to my spouse. At which moment in the recruitment process would it be appropriate to bring this up? That is a good question. Here, my recommendation, my answer would say it depends on whether you go through a recruiter or directly with the company. If you go through with the recruiter, I would mention it relatively early on in the recruitment process and say, listen, I'm super interested, I'm engaged in the recruitment process, I'm committed. However, I need to make sure that my spouse receives support in the new country in finding a job. Either because offering both a job is rather unlikely, but there are relocation companies or companies like actually career angels that are sometimes hired to help the spouse find a job in the expat's country. So if you go through a recruiter, through a headhunting firm, I would mention it early on, maybe not in the first getting to know interview, but once something serious comes up to say, listen, yes, I'm committed, but here is a spouse. How would you see that? How do you think will your client react to that? Is there within the relocation package a budget to help my spouse find a job locally? If you go directly with the company, and they say, yes, we want to hire you, I would bring it up probably, well, here I'd say it depends. Either in the conversation with HR, which is probably somewhere second, third stage, or as part of the negotiation. If you really have confirmed interest and they say, yes, we want to hire you, to say, listen, fantastic, but for that to happen, this is one of my conditions, for example. Does that help? Okay, next one. Does this methodology apply to countries where the job market is very competitive for the low rate of job opportunities like Spain? Do the percentages that you showed at the beginning of the presentation work for all countries? Marisa, this is a good question. It works in the Western world. So we've tried that for Spain, we tried in Latin America, and the fewer job opportunities, the more competitive, the better our approaches work, especially with the proactively reaching out to your potential bosses. And what definitely for 2020, what definitely can't be underestimated is now the applicant tracking systems. I hope that answers your question, Marisa. Okay, good. I still have 15 slides. So before we move to the bigger Q&A, let me wrap up. If you think this was valuable, if you think this was valuable and you think this could be useful to your friends, family members, colleagues, former colleagues, please help us spread the word. We have one more module to go. So next time is interviewing, online, offline, how to prepare for them. And I can safely say I usually don't promote modules up front, and I don't spend that much time on it. But if you know anybody who is interviewing, who will be interviewing, I highly recommend you to tell them to join, because you will see how many mistakes people make when interviewing and how many techniques they are that simply are like not taken into consideration. Anka says, I have an interview this Friday. If you can't wait till Friday, look at the recording from last week, from a month ago. And congratulations if that's your first interview after 3 months of searching. So definitely make sure they watch it live, or at least a recording. If you, in the meantime, want to know what's going on, you can follow Career Angels on LinkedIn. Currently, we publish something daily, sometimes even twice a day. You can follow our blog. You can read our guide on how to look for a job in light of COVID-19. You can find our free materials on the website. You can join the group, and I've already given you a couple of tips today how to use the group to your advantage. You can join the group on Facebook. You can support our crowdfunding via PayPal. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow our page on Facebook, on LinkedIn. You can engage with our content if it's appropriate. And how else you can say thank you? You can also tell your friends to do exactly the same. It would be immensely helpful if you help us, well, spread the word. And now over to you. We still have 12 minutes for Q&A. Can be more specific questions, can be broader questions. So I'm here another 11 minutes if you wanna if you have any more questions. Okay, a couple of people typing. Marcelina will send you today the link to the file on how to find email addresses. Okay, no questions. Let's see if I can come up with questions that haven't been asked yet today compared to previous modules. Okay, if there are no questions, then I actually have a question for you. What are your takeaways after today's module? What was new for you? What are your takeaways? What are your insights? I'm interested. I actually want to know. Then maybe I can comment on your. Okay, importance of networking, direct approach. Okay, stop chasing the headhunter. Yes, the headhunters are poor. That all 4 channels are important. Methodology to approach the research. High success of reaching out to your potential bosses. The structure of inbox management. And Okay, there is a good question from Magda. Should you always write directly to companies in the local language? Is it a good idea to write in English to German companies? Oh, that's a very good question. If you say in your CV that you do speak German and you can work in German, then applying in English will reduce your response rate to 0 to 5, maximum 10%. If you claim to be able to work in German. And that is equally true for headhunters and companies. We've run those experiments with a client of ours. In markets where the local language is important, Austria, Germany, French, and France, if you speak the language or you claim to be speaking the language, you can work in the language, you need to apply in the local language. If you don't, and you do it in English, but if you don't speak the local language enough to work in that language, to at least interview in the language, then applying in English is absolutely fine. Catherine says, I didn't think you could have success with blind applications. 20 years ago, job search meant answering job ads. Yes, that's definitely true. And the thing is, Maciej, we're now 2000. Yeah, as of June, I have been on the job market for 18 years. My first job was a recruiter in 2002. And my advice to candidates, or part of the advice to candidates from 2002, would be now harmful to candidates in 2020. So that's why I know it might seem that I'm exaggerating, but there are a lot of recruiters who repeat, or HR people or anybody who repeat career advice, that have been repeating career advice since the 90s, the early, like me when I started in 2002, and they keep repeating the same advice, having not realized that the job market has changed so much. So the only thing that I want to say, I do believe everybody wants to help and there are good intentions behind it, but be sure that the advice they're giving is updated, that it's really up to date, that they know how technology works, etc. Yeah, networking strategies. I've never thought about it that way. I'm glad. Stop insisting on headhunters to reply. Okay, good. Okay, I'm glad that you have so many insights. Thank you for sticking around the full 2 hours. I think there's one more comment coming. If you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out. Marcelina is very responsive. If you need additional information, let us know as well. Sandra, how about applying for job ads in Poland with English CV? If you apply, when you have a job ad, you send the CV in the language of the job ad. So if the job ad is in English, you send your CV in English. If it says Polish, then you send it in Polish, usually, or especially if there's an applicant tracking system behind it, so the system can match you. So here you adapt the language of the CV to the language of the job ad, unless it actually says it doesn't matter what language to send the CV in. Okay. I don't know, there are a couple of people typing, so I don't know if it's questions or thank you, and I'm logging off. I think it's thank yous already. Good. So this time we're finishing off a little bit earlier. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to find us, send us an email. If you need additional info, you can look at the recordings from the previous, or send your friends the recordings on our YouTube channel. Okay, good. There is one more question. Let's say that's the last question for today, because otherwise I'll keep saying goodbye every 2 minutes. What about when you apply for a job in your own country? I always apply in English. Here I'd say it depends who you send your CV to. If it is an international corporation where it's absolutely okay, and it's also language specific. So to give an example, it is an example of a former client of mine who sent an application, like the email was in German, she's Austrian, sent an email to a major international big German corporation and attached a CV in English. The response was, in a very rude tone, "You're applying to a German company, why don't you send a German CV?" And that was put in a very, very rude, aggressive tone. So what I want to say with that, you need to know your target group. So if it's okay for a target group, which would be fine, for example, in Poland, English is a very common language in corporations, it's absolutely fine. But a French speaker, probably not a good idea. So you need to answer that for yourself in your own local country. Okay, good. So again, thank you very much for joining today. Thank you for sticking around the 2 hours. I'm looking forward to staying in touch. Looking forward to seeing you in our next and last module about interviews, which is my favorite topic. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a nice afternoon. Bye. Hi, thank you for watching our material. If you found it interesting and you'd like to see more, subscribe below. If you do not want to watch recordings but actually want to join live, find us on Facebook. See you next time.